We're going to have a little short discussion about reaction paper 3 and talking a little bit about comparing empiricism and rationalism together. So, briefly, here's the questions that we're asking. What were the influences of the ancient Greek philosophers, in particular Plato and Aristotle, on empirical and rational philosophy? And how are the philosophies in Locke and Kant related to the nature-nurture question? So, first thing I'm going to do is a quick little reminder on what these different philosophies are. See, empiricism, I'm just going to read your definitions here. The belief that all knowledge is derived from experience, in particular sensory experience. Okay, so you're born with nothing, and everything you have comes in through your senses. Rationalism, as an essential philosophy, says you have an active mind and it transforms sensory information and is capable of understanding abstract principles or concepts not attainable from sensory information. Remember Kant's categories of thought. As we said, it was predating the precursor to the Gestalt psychologists and their organizing principles that we're going to talk about. Okay. So here's a little breakdown on some of the comparisons, all right? Empiricism emphasizes sensory experience as the thing that creates what's in your mind. Rationalism emphasizes mental processes as how things get in your mind. Empiricism emphasizes the principles, the laws of association in particular. Remember Aristotle's laws of association, which were more formalized by Locke, whereas rationalism makes reference to these organizing principles or categories of thought or things that are already in your mind at the moment you're born. The empiricists, and so by the way, stepping back, these association principles and these organizing principles aren't that terribly different exactly, because if you recall, I mean, as much as John Locke tried his damnedest to avoid it, he just could not avoid it. Keep in mind that simple powers of the mind, that little phrase that John Locke put in there that he could not get rid of, and he didn't like it. And there's powers of the mind, which seem to be the root of the laws of association, because it's like, well, why? You know, he could talk about the laws of association, law of contiguity. Thoughts of salt lead to thoughts of pepper because they've occurred together, because the sensory experience of salt has occurred at the same time as the sensory experience of pepper. Therefore, thoughts of salt lead to thoughts of pepper. Thoughts of pepper. Law of contiguity. Yes, but why does that happen, John Locke? I don't know. The powers of the mind, says John Locke. But guess what? The rationalists, they had their organizing principles, in particular things such as categories of thought, but categories of thought, powers of the mind, potato, potato. That's my opinion on that, okay? The empiricists proposed a passive mind, whereas the rationalists proposed an active mind. And again, I don't know that the empiricists tried to present the passive mind, but again, in fact, powers of the mind is an active mind. I mean, how the hell is powers of the mind any different from categories of thought? Okay, empiricists were emphasizing more experimentally based things, whereas rationalists were going to be proposing more theoretically based things. Guess what's going to happen when we merge these together? It's going to be called science. Ha-ha. Science, good stuff. Empiricists create more of a reductionistic thinking, which is to say that all mental experience, in fact, even better, remember John Locke had his complex ideas, and these complex ideas were composed of simple ideas. That is to say, the simple ideas were irreducible. The idea of door, the idea of window, the idea of gutter. These are irreducible, but put them together, you have the idea of house. The complex idea, and the complex idea can be reduced to the simple ideas. The rationalists were more likely to say, it's not, it all, in fact, the rationalists, I'm going to give you the mantra that we're going to come back to with the Gestalt psychologist, which is to say, the whole is more than the sum of its parts, okay? The whole house is more than the sum of window plus door plus gutter. Okay? You can't reduce it down, because once you put them together, it becomes something more. Okay? And so, as a general rule, as we said here, I'm just pulling out one of those comparisons and expanding on it. The empiricists propose a passive mind, a mind whose contents are determined by sensory experience, a few mechanistic principles, reflection, powers of the mind. Rationalists generally propose a mind equipped with categories or operations that are used to put them together. Okay, so going back to what the paper's about. What were the influences of ancient Greek philosophy? Okay, clearly, Plato said, if you want to know about the world, you should turn inside yourself and find the answer. Gee, that's exactly what the rationalists are saying, right? Because remember, he said, Plato said, true knowledge can never be gained by looking at the world in front of you because every dog is different. And so what the heck are you going to learn about dogs by looking at a single dog, since every dog is different? You want to know the truth? Look inside yourself. Remember that wackiness? Your soul knows the answer. Soul knows the answer sounds an awful lot like Kant's conception of categories of thought, doesn't it? The soul already knows the answer. Whereas Aristotle, it said, you want knowledge, you look to the world in front of you, you add them all together, and what they share in common equals. That sounds very much like the reductionistic view that the empirical philosophers are coming up with. Again, I mean, John Locke proposed a blank slate and said everything comes to your senses and it all put together, and if you want to know, true knowledge comes from observation of the world. So clearly these influences, true knowledge comes from studying your soul and looking to the heavens. True knowledge comes from studying the world. It's exactly what the rationalists and the empiricists were talking about. How are the philosophies of Locke and Kant related to the nature-nurture question? Okay, and again, obviously these two questions are sort of put together. How are they? And this is where, let me see, how the philosophies of Locke and Kant related to the nature question? Duh, come on, I just already talked about that with question one. All right, so you're going to have to tease apart what I said in the first question and answer the second one, because it's the same thing. Don't forget in this particular paper that you also want to put your ideas, okay? You need to talk about, what do you think about these categories of thought? What do you think about? I mean, again, in my opinion, they both have some merits. As I said, in my opinion, you can't pull apart empiricism and rationalism. I mean, as much as Locke tried, I mean, I keep on coming back to that silly little statement, powers of the mind, like reflection, the powers of the mind, and in my mind, powers of the mind is not particularly different from, and in fact, I would think, if we think about this in terms of what's his name, just in the last presentation we talked about Leibniz, and as Leibniz had pointed out, that principle of continuity, even in the empiricist rationalist debate, I think you have a continuity question going on, in that how, not a matter of do you think the mind is born blank or do you think the mind is born with powers or categories of thought, but instead how much of. Okay, so I think personally, if I was to write this paper, I would implement the principle of continuity that Leibniz had put out there to say, look, that even this empiricism versus rationalism debate is not a yes or a no thing. It is a matter of degree. Okay, so I'd like to see what your thoughts are on that, and I'm anxious looking forward to your papers.